When exploring the wastes of the Commonwealth, many horrific and tragic stories can be found in the ruins of Boston and the wider area. Some are tales of people mauled by the mutated horrors that now dwell in the world. Some are people falling victim to those who have given to the darker side of humanity, either in the name of survival or because they're truly monsters. But every now and again, we get tales that remind us that life before the world could still be horrific, that people were just as capable of being total dumpster fires of human beings. Well, today, we're going to be taking a look at a mix of these two instances. Better yet, they all take place in a location that was either some of the best or the worst times of your life, both for the people in the world of Fallout and you, the viewers. Today, we take a look at the schools of the Commonwealth. We see how experimentation on students wasn't something only limited to the likes of Vault-Tec and their shenanigans. We take a look at how the Institute's thirst for knowledge and Brotherhood of Steel levels of dibs on pre-war tech got an entire settlement killed. We see a principal undertake some pretty underhanded actions to satisfy their own greed. And lastly, we get a wonderful look at the many ways that raiders can go off the rails, and how they set up in some schools when they did. This is my longest video to date, and you've heard it all before, but likes, comments, and falling asleep to my soothing voice while watching the video will all help to ensure the algorithm's gaze falls favorably upon this video. Before the hate arrives, yes, I've covered these areas before, but I wanted to do a compilation video, and it's been at least 7 years for some of these, and longer for others, so I feel like that's enough time to take another look. So let's get into more than an hour of lore on the schools of Fallout 4. First off, we go to a quaint school located in the southern part of the map. A school just like any other. Desks and burned out buses. Pink ghouls. Wait, what? You know, taking a look now, I hope YouTube doesn't mistake these for declothed humans and age restrict the video. All the more reason to get in while it's fresh. But yes, the ghouls here look like they've been even more deprived of vitamin D than normal. And at first, we're completely in the dark as to how this happened. Or at least, depending on how you came here, you will be. There's actually a random event that involves the culprit here, the paste, and a note. When we get the note, there's a bunch of bodies, also some of the paste in question. So we'll look at the notes, but I'm sure you can already put together what has likely happened. Someone called Hank has started eating this paste, and they got it when the group went into the school. This tells us that, at least to some extent, there was a post-Fallout presence there outside of the ghouls, though more on that later. Apparently Hank has exhibited some, let's call them behavioural changes, since he started to eat it. Now why the others aren't affected, I don't know, as they were also eating it, and it seemed to be quite fast acting. No mention of him turning pink, which is important later. He shot some people who were fleeing, and apparently this is an issue as they're better than that. Like, come on buddy, it's 2287. If you chase someone off their farm and take all their stuff, you've already killed them. Now he also says the paste tastes good, and this isn't what we see later. So it may be that time has changed it. Now clearly, given the carnage that you find, Hank decided to drop his friends instead of the paste. And we aren't talking about paste that we all ate at one point or another in school. No, this is something else. So we need to delve a little deeper to get to the bottom of this mystery. So straight away, we get the information that whatever this pink goop is, it's driving people slightly madder than they already are. And remember, that bar was already pretty high. Additionally, it means some people have managed to get into the school and get out, which given the large amount of strawberry ghouls running around, is a pretty impressive feat. Also yes, it does look like the custard that the Teletubbies used to eat. On the topic of these ghouls, let's take a closer look at them. The general pigmentation we see with most ghouls, quite a yellow, almost jaundiced one, is completely gone. Replacing it is a pink coloration that in a human I would say would look healthy, maybe even a little sunburned, but in the ghouls it's just wrong. Inhuman monsters running at you is fine, but what looks like a nudist camp on acid with the whole butcher shop front on display, or I guess in this case the Ken doll, no thank you. I'm sure you, with your fine galaxy brain, have already put together that there's a link between these pink bastards and the pink paste we found outside, and shall continue to find inside the school. Well, there's quite a story here, so let's dive in. As soon as we enter, we can see that the school was definitely preparing for Halloween, given all the decorations up. Straight ahead, we find some poor sod who may have died putting them up. We find a ladder quite close to them, so it was either this or maintenance work. This was a Saturday, remember, so it is a little bit odd why they're here. If we are assuming they died in the initial blast, which I think is reasonable given the proximity to the glowing sea. Behind them, to the right, we get to what seems like the reception area. Again, we find the remains of someone's skeleton, but yeah, this one didn't fare as well. So it could have just as easily been an older victim of the ghouls. A lot of drink around them, so perhaps their body was jostled while someone raided the hidden drinks cache of one of the now dead teachers. Opposite them is a strange terminal with literally no entries on it. It seems like a bug that was never fixed, as it's literally been years since I've last been here. The pink handprint and the food tray indicates somebody was here. However, it's impossible to say how long ago it was. It seems unlikely a feral ghoul be plating their food, and they all seem to have been here for a while, given the degree of changes they've undergone. That suggests that this could have been left here a very long time ago, and it just keeps that well, which we'll get to. After this, we come to the room of the principal that you, like me, will come to despise. The good news is she probably died here as well, as this body is likely hers. If some staff were here, which they seem to have been, as we'll see, she likely was as well. On her terminal, we can see her name is Jackie Hudson, and there's only one entry in documents. It seems she decided her school would participate in something called the Nutritional Alternative Pace Program, or NAP. The goal seems to have been to subject the students and the staff to only this food for the purpose of the study. Only this kind of food was allowed in the school grounds to ensure the data was accurate. Now, if the goal was to see how it would affect a whole school, then I understand this. But if they just wanted to see what its effects were in general, wouldn't a control group or something of students or staff make a lot more sense? Food nutritional experts, feel free to weigh in. The participation seems to have come with some funds for the school, which likely drove the overall decision to do this. The threat of taking away these funds seems to have been enough to get the principal to comply. We also get a holotape of her announcing the change, which we can take a listen to right now.
Good morning, teachers and students. It is another great week here at Suffolk County Charter School. I hope everyone is getting their costumes together for the annual Halloween festival. I would like to take this opportunity to remind you that no outside food is to be brought on campus as of this week. This goes for faculty as well as students. We have received generous donations for our implementation of the Nutrition Alternative Pace Program. We owe our benefactors strict adherence to the rules they have set forth. Thank you for your attention. This is Principal Hudson signing off.
So it appears this was week 1 of the program, and it was the program's only week, as this occurred the Monday before the bombs fell. This is important when we see reports of what this was doing to the students and faculty later, so just keep this date in mind. He's also just a tiny bit disingenuous about the donations part. It wasn't a donation, Jackie. They paid you to allow them to experiment on your school. So she's already way out in front in the race for worst educator in this video, but whether she sticks the landing by the end of it, you'll have to decide. Across the way from her office, we can find the toilets, and I like that they actually included the different size urinals. Also, someone was stashing jet in the toilets. Now, again, it could be post-war, but it's really strange why they do this, and given the radiation and likely either already fertilized school population on their way there, or large population of fertilized ghouls from some other group, it's more likely that somebody was up to no good before the fallout, not after. Past the toilets and the previously mentioned ladder, we get to the classrooms. They're of a good size, and these, together with the others on the next floor up, would seem to indicate that there was at least over 100 people in attendance here. Not a lot of bodies, but it was a Saturday, so apart from the odd poor bastard in detention, we can expect that only the staff were here. In the opposite room, we find more of the paste and more of the handprints indicating somebody was finger painting. I think at this point, along with the previous terminal, it's likely the ghouls came across the centuries-old remains of someone's lunch. Then, due to the effect it's having on them after eating, they just start smearing it everywhere. How old? Who knows? We'll have to keep looking. The terminal here belongs to one Henry Smith, a teacher here. In it, they have drafted a complaint letter, wherein they've basically asked Principal Hudson, what the Christ. It's pretty well written, but needs more teeth, in my opinion. From the language used, it seems like the choice to introduce the paste wasn't only unpopular, it wasn't even a unanimous decision among the staff. It seems like the principal just went for it. We also start to see that it actually does have an effect on them. A lot more visits to her office for misbehavior are occurring, and he seems to think it's affecting their mood as well. Then the bottom gives the big clue, if you hadn't already figured it out, to why the ghouls are pink. Apparently people are getting pinker after having consumed the paste. And remember, it's only been a week. Christ the Knight knows what was in it. But if this was happening after only 1 week, it could suggest the ghouls haven't been there that long, as they could have only been eating it a short while and still turned pink. In the classroom opposite this, we can find a bear set up to study hard in class, and as always, we have to ask if it's a stand-in for a body. Could be somebody here for detention on a Saturday. One of the few in here, surprisingly, given where we are. Around the corner we can pass some more of the classrooms. Nothing of note jumps out at us except the floors collapsed in one of them, and there are more handprints here as well. though this time no paste near it. Out in the hall we can find another dead staff member, this one a cleaner of some description. Although from the state of this place, they weren't doing a good job anyway, so their loss has not been felt. I think this one is a very strong pre-fallout death, which suggests that at least a few of the others likely were as well. The last thing on this floor is the cafeteria, and it's a total shit show. First off, the floor of the cafeteria has collapsed into the basement, and the floor of the first floor has collapsed into the cafeteria. Second, there is nap paste everywhere. It looks like a lot of this was plated and ready to eat, which makes me think that these again are the remains of someone's food. Now there may have been a post-war presence here, given the notes that we found, or at least I hope it was post-war, and we'll get to that later. But the nozzles on the walls and the mess around them tells us how the ghouls at least were getting a fresh supply, by pawing at it like morons, and eating whatever came out. Given how many were here, it really says a lot of how much was stored here. The place must have had a massive supply. We can see where they resupplied in the room to the left of the dispensers, and it looks like they just emptied buckets of something into this machine. Like seriously, what were they feeding these waynes? I mean, the supply must be massive if there's still this much left after 2 centuries. Moreover, it's still edible, although I use that word lightly as it doesn't appear to have been truly edible to begin with. How it still kept its paste form is beyond me. If it does keep this well, it would suggest the goal of the experiment was to see how people would respond to this food that did work long term, and would still be fine after centuries. Perhaps it would have been food in an enclosed space underground for humans. But that's just speculation. Apart from the Vault Dweller's survival guide, I don't think we ever got information that suggested Vault-Tec was involved. Based on the amount spread around the floors, it's clear to me that the ghouls set up here likely also consumed the lion's share of the paste in here. There is some more to see upstairs, which we'll look at, but most of it was here. Now to listen to the second holotape from Principal Hudson that can be found on the podium over here.
Good morning, teachers and students. It is a fabulous Wednesday here at Suffolk County Charter School. The Glee Club is having their seasonal bake sale today, so stop by and show your support so we can send our team to the regionals. Remember, actual baked goods are forbidden on school grounds, so they will be selling colorful cups for your food paste. Oh, also, we will be having a school assembly during second period tomorrow on the dangers of strangers by Jangles, the moon monkey himself. Once again, we would like to thank our benefactors from the NAPP program for allowing us to have such a big star come and speak to you kids. We owe our benefactors strict adherence to the rules they have set forth. This is Principal Hudson, signing off. Have a great day.
Now granted, I'm not a particularly gleeful person, but I really think there isn't going to be much glee if all you've got to go on is pink paste and colourful cups to try and offset how awful it is. I fully expect this bake sale was a total failure, and rightfully so. They could have just moved it off the school property and allowed people to participate properly. Additionally, the NAP is still trying to improve the reputation in the school, using the big lad himself, Jangles the Moon Monkey, the creepiest monkey beside the Symbols one that touts on us or detonates explosives. She ends up by driving home the strict adherence nonsense again. And just remember, at this point, we're only halfway through the week. Now heading upstairs, before we take a look at the basement, we find this fine fellow, and they are strapped. Either this school was a lot more dangerous than we're led to believe, or this was a post-Fallout looter. Could be one of the many people that came here and ended up eating this paste. Perhaps the behavioural changes caused them to get in a gunfight, and they died, or the pink ghouls here killed them while defending their food source. Down the hallway we can find another classroom, and this one looks like it had a teacher in it. There's another bug here with a note spawning that you can usually find on the body of a Vault-Tec rep, but I don't think it's related to here. What we do see is that whoever was at this desk had a not so subtle stash of food, as I doubt this box was full of more paste. So somebody wasn't being very appreciative of their new nap overlords. Scoundrel. Through a hole in the wall next to them, we can find a woman hiding in the walls with a suitcase. This really better be post-war, because if not, along with the shit going on in the basement, which we'll get to, there was worse being done at this school than shoveling foam down people's mouths. Also on this floor is a staff break room, with another 2 bodies inside it. Now there also looks to be some non-nap approved food in here, going off of these lunchboxes, so they deserve death anyway. But there was just a fest of the feed at the back. Someone has put it everywhere. And given the handprints, I'm just going to blame the ghouls, who clearly never learned not to waste good food. Opposite the break room is the library, and it's totally wrecked. There's a fair amount of goop in here as well, and this stands to reason given this is the culmination of the ghoul presence here. There's also a large amount of bodies as well, more here than anywhere else. Now, given it was a Saturday, I can't help but wonder if, given all that has happened, were the teachers meeting here to discuss the pink paste? Maybe even some of these people were parents. Likely also explains why some of the faculty had other food on them. I'd be surprised if the nap rules also governed the weekends as well. We'll never know who these actually were, but teachers seems likely to me. Now to talk about the last of the holotapes we can find here.
Happy Friday all. The NAPP program launched this week with success, but not without problems. I hate to have to throw away your mother's carefully packed lunches, but I am afraid we must put our foot down on this issue. I am assured all of you will get used to the flavor of the paste. Also, I have been informed that flavor varieties will be on their way pending continued success of the program. How exciting! To those complaining, I will repeat. There are absolutely no psychological or physical side effects from participation in the NAPP. Any observed effect is assuredly psychosomatic, and possibly related to a lack of trust in the government. Remember, our participation in the NAPP not only helps our school, but in the long run benefits our nation. Thank you for your attention. This is Principal Hudson, signing off.
This one took place the day before the bombs. It's only been 5 days, which means that the issues with behaviour and with everyone turning pink were indeed taking place in just under a week, which is very bad. She comes off as unbelievably smarmy, and I have to wonder at the legality of this. Schools aren't required everywhere to provide lunches, but I've never heard of them being able to stop anyone bringing in food, full stop. Certainly the ones due to allergies, but all foods? It seems like she would have been taken to court pretty soon. But then again, a lot of illegal stuff went on back then. And this isn't even the most illegal thing we'll see from a teacher in this video. She also mentions the taste. Like I said at the start of the video, either time has changed it or the standards of people post-war are lower. Which, I mean, they almost certainly are. She continues by doubling down that the paste certainly does not cause any physical or psychological problems. And again, only 5 days, so they must have been pretty severe for everyone to be bringing them up after such a short period of time. I haven't rewatched my old video on this place, but I feel like I may have made a comparison between this woman and Dolores Umbridge. If not, I'm making it now. Especially the part about mistrusting the government. I can almost hear her saying that you're questioning the Ministry of Magic. In my opinion, the only way this food would really benefit the nation is if it was meant to be a nuclear winter food ration, or something similar. The last thing to look at downstairs before we hit the basement is the kitchen, or what used to be the kitchen. It's just full of boxes and barrels now, and they've likely been here since before the fallout. These are probably what the paste came in, and was then emptied into that godforsaken machine, and extracted into those vents for distribution. It really does drive home just how committed Hudson was to make sure there was no way to get food in the grounds that wasn't from the NAPP. Now on to the basement. Apart from some barrels and some pretty flimsy looking foundations, there isn't really a lot down here. Except, you know, somebody locked in a cage. Yeah, that took a turn, didn't it? The door is locked when we get down here, and there's a terminal that opens it. Now, presumably, this cage played a different role at some point, like storage, but now it's some poor bastard's tomb. Ruling out the plunger as a culprit, we can see 2 mattresses here, so possibly there was more than one person here at some point. Additionally, they've been eating the paste, or at least had it provided to them, and for some reason they've got a stealth boy. I think we can rule out the ghouls as culprits given their feral, and the door is locked when we get here. Additionally, they look long dead, so either they're pre- or post-war. If it's the latter, they could have been taking shelter here, possibly with someone else, given the mattress. They began to eat the paste, not knowing the effect it would have on them. They were then attacked or got into a disagreement with the person they were with, and they were either killed and left here, or locked in, and eventually died. Possibly of their wounds, as starvation seems unlikely as there's still some paste left over. Unless, you know, the nutritional value truly was so low that they died despite having access to some of it. They could have also been with the group that Hank was, though I feel like this would have been mentioned in the letter. If it's the former, well, going off of the book, perhaps severe library fines. They've got a stealth boy as well, so maybe they were using it to get down here to investigate the paste, and they got caught. might explain the bye packing upstairs, simply escorting our friend down here to their cage. All in all, very strange, and really adds to the overall questions we have left hanging regarding this place. So there it is. Principal Hudson forced her school to consume only a dubious paste from an organisation called NAP, all for some extra funding. A lot of the staff and students seem to take issue with this, given the complaint draft and her addressing the accusations after only a week. The effects are definitely real. Apart from that note, we can't really speak the behavioural ones, but the ghouls are definitely pink. Now how long they've been consuming it is hard to say, but if people were noticeably turning pink after less than a week, it may not have even been that long. So whatever this stuff was, it certainly affected people physically, which lends credibility to the psychological effects as well. It lasted about 2 centuries, as we can eat it and others have as well, which means it didn't spoil and maintained its paste form. So in some regard, I guess it was a smashing success. Someone just has to work out the small issues of making people look like a sunburned ballsack and turning them into psychos. So we've just taken a look at a horrible event at an institute of learning before the war. Now let's take a look at a horrible event at an institute of higher learning after the war, or at least somewhat after. There's a large component that took place before, but we'll get into all of that. I am talking, of course, about University Point, a quaint location not too far from Suffolk County Charter School. In fact, all the schools we've taken a look at are pretty close together, all near the coast. When we first roll up, we see a lovely sign welcoming us. We are traders, we have goods, we have wares, we have caps. Oh, Mary Mother of Jesus, they're all dead. Yeah, it's not great. Just walking in, we can see a lot of bodies straight away, and they look like they were killed in the middle of doing something, possibly while shooting some hoops. This indicates that whatever happened here may have been sudden, and that there may not have been much of an opportunity for the people here to respond. Taking a left as we enter the university campus, we can find a lookout tower of sorts, and someone dressed in military fatigues is here. Likely they were security of some sort. Also post-war, as this is definitely a post-war structure. Moving into the building behind them, we can find a store that once sold armour and clothing. Given its size, it would likely have served more than just the population of this town, and given the trader's sign, along with the entries we'll see later, this settlement definitely did a decent amount of business with traders. This is part of the reason why it's not bereft of all life, though they can hardly be blamed for that. Heading towards the centre of this square, we can find several homes, given the bedding, and a crop field. Also, we start encountering the synths more. Oh yes, I forgot to mention that. There are synths here, which kinda gives you a big thick clue as to what probably happened to the people here. Several of the bodies that we find are on their beds, suggesting that when this attack happened, it either happened early in the morning or late at night. Or, the people of this settlement were just lazy. The homes here are also a lot more run down than I'd have thought. I mean, yeah, they've been partially destroyed, but still, for a settlement that's apparently been here for quite a while, it's odd. The next building is the weapon shop, and predictably, whomever was here actually managed to put up some sort of a fight. They managed to flip a table, and they seem to have used that as cover while they engaged the synths. Whoever was the once proud owner of the ribs and spine that we passed on the way in, however, didn't fare as well. Though in the end, neither did the supposed owner of this shop, but they tried, and that's what kind of counts. Up on the first floor, someone else, perhaps their wife, made a good attempt of it as well, though they ultimately failed. I'm not really sure what the deal with the skull on the dresser is. Seems like an odd thing for a synth to do, and it isn't the last time we'll see something odd like this here. It also seems to highlight a bit of disparity between the residents here. These two got a whole kind of wreck shop, but others just got a shed with an odd number of walls. Perhaps running a shop was seen as enough to warrant better accommodation. Tragically, we can find the liquor store next door, and the heartless machines didn't even have the decency to leave it be. It's here we also get our first holotape from a woman named Sylvia, and it tells us some of what was occurring here in the days up to the synth attack. And no, I have no idea why I have two of them.
Sylvia, I don't care what Bert says. People have a right to know what kind of danger they're in. Look, the youngsters may think the Institute is just a ghost story, but I know you're old enough to remember the attacks. I know you feel for the girl, but she brought the trouble down on us. She and her father need to answer for it. If we give the Institute what they want, or just give them the girl even, maybe they'll leave us alone.
So this holotape is for a woman called Sylvia, and it's a man called Perry talking in it, and they don't sound thrilled. They're complaining about some danger to themselves and others, and seem to be accusing someone called Bert of withholding this information from the people, which we'll see later. It involves the Institute, and he's trying to remind her of the attacks both she and himself seemed to have witnessed when they were younger, reminding her about all this in an attempt to get her to appreciate the danger the current situation presents, as he seems to be blaming someone Sylvia cares about, a girl and her father, who we'll meet shortly. He thinks they need to answer for it, and he is willing to go as far as giving the girl to the Institute to do it. So we know he's desperate, but does it make him an asshole? Yeah, maybe. We'll have to learn more to make that decision. But he wants Sylvia on his side, presumably so he gets the support, so he can do whatever he feels he needs to do to make himself safe. We'll need to take a look at the building on the other side of the square to find out exactly what has happened that has him so scared. Approaching this building, we can see the downstairs section is a coffee shop or a restaurant of some description, and that it also came under attack. Somebody here made a go of mounting a resistance to the synths. Just like in the weapon shop, we can find their bodies behind the table, and they don't seem to have fared too well, given, they're dead. But at least they did more than these two in the booth. They had to have died in the opening salvo. If not, then did they just sit here the whole time while people were actively being killed, and make no attempt to do anything? They could be pre-war, but we know this building was being used by the settlement, so why would they just leave these bodies here all this time in a building that we know they used? Another body can be found behind the counter of the restaurant, and they seem to have died by holding a bottle of milk. I could make a spilled milk joke here, but I'll refrain from doing so. The last body can be found in the corner, possibly because they were hiding when this all kicked off. Upstairs, we come to the mayor's office, and yeah, there's another weird setup here. Someone, or more likely something, took a skull and set it up on the table. Very macabre, possibly part of the synth's programming, as a warning to anyone who would show up here after. As if, the many dead bodies weren't warning enough. We can also find a body here in a storage room of sorts, and they were packing. Seems like they too decided to stand and fight, though again, it didn't really help. Near them we can find the remains of someone who was out on the constructed balcony when they were killed. Either that or they did a runner and got taken out before they could vault it. There wasn't too much grace in this death, but sure they did better than the ones who died in their beds. The mayor's terminal is here, but we'll take a look at a holotape recording of a meeting that took place that we can find here first, just for some context for what comes next.
As head of the town council, I call this meeting to order. In attendance this evening, we have Perry Owens, Gerald Spencer, Sylvia Cooper, and myself, Bert Strickland, as acting council head.
Bert, what is all this about? I've got wheat that needs bringing in.
Yesterday, I received a very disturbing visitor. I managed to record part of the conversation. It's probably best if you all hear it. I don't see anything about that in my records. What was it you said you wanted again?
Don't toy with me. We know a girl here found some pre-war data related to energy research, and you're gonna give it to us.
I really have no idea what data you think we have. We're just farmers and fishers. I'd be happy to ask around for you. Please, just lower the gun.
Look, I'm a reasonable man, but the Institute wants that data. You got 2 days to get it for me, and then we do this the hard way. Oh God, Jacqueline.
What has your daughter done, Gerald?
She's been saying that she was close to finding something in those old terminals she fixes up. But I don't think she actually found anything.
Bullshit. Now, I overheard her talking to that trader last week. Something about getting 10 times the price for something if she sold it in Diamond City.
Look, just let me talk to her. See if she actually has this data or not.
Pete, sit down. We all need to remain calm about this. I need you all to keep this to yourselves for now. The last thing we need is to start a panic.
So first off, Sylvia, love, you haven't got much wheat there, so I don't know what the rush in bringing it in is. It's a small harvest. Might be why those houses were so run down. They were just being used by some farmers to catch up on some rest, in between the grueling job of farming a space less than 50 square meters. Second, we learned the council members of the time were Perry Owens, Sylvia Cooper, Gerald Spencer, and Bert Strickland. The Pete that Bert mentioned at the end seems to be Perry, so either he's going a bit or he goes by both of them. But this tape tells us exactly what Perry was talking to Sylvia about. Either someone from, or someone working on behalf of, the Institute showed up and threatened Bert at gunpoint for some data. Data he knows nothing about, by the way, so he wasn't lying about that. Data on pre-war energy research, which we'll get to. Gerald confirms that Jacqueline, the daughter in question, was looking for something, but that she hadn't found it yet. Perry thinks she's lying as he apparently eavesdropped on her talking to a trader about it, which likely explains how the information got out in the first place. Bert ends the tape by asking everyone to remain quiet, as he rightfully surmises that people will go apeshit if they hear about this. Which, let's be honest, they definitely will. We can see this in the terminal as the information does get out, and the people turn against Gerald and his daughter. So before we dive in, I just want to state something going forward. Some of the terminal entries on these and other terminals are in the wrong order or dated incorrectly. Some have the same date despite being recorded centuries apart. Some of them have the latest entry first and the earliest last, as opposed to pretty much every other terminal in the game. I will do my best to address this as we go on, but sometimes there's just simply not enough information to determine what the right order is, especially when it's entries that are all replies to emails found on other terminals. So first off, the Town Council logs. They're an excellent example of the log order being wrong, with the first one taking place on the 1st of July 2285 being at the bottom. Like some entries, it is corrupted, possibly due to the Institute, but it was a meeting to discuss the purchase of another generator for the town. The entry after this is better, taking place on the 1st of August 2285. In it, the council vote to limit the crop exports to 20%. So, unless they have more fields somewhere, they're trading pretty much nothing. Likely this was done so they'd have more left over for them. The rest of the meeting gives us the password for the credit union vault, which plays a key role in the energy research program that was going on here. Not the most original password, though, but it's one of the ones that gets us in. The more important one comes later. The last entry took place on the 12th of August, and this is where the information regarding the individual claiming to be from the Institute was discussed. We'll learn that the agreement of don't tell the people, they'll act like a mob wasn't held to, and the people did just that. Gladys has a good head on her shoulders and asked if it's a trick. Pete, or Perry Owens, not sure what to call this human chameleon, escalates things rapidly by suggesting a mild bit of sacrifice to appease their machine god overlords. Gerald responded in a level-headed manner by throwing hands, rapidly losing sympathy for Perry Pete, or P squared. This ends the meeting and they all decide to mull it over for a day. So it's nice to see that local councils work just as effectively post-war as they did pre-war. Next up are the entries on this terminal from the mail relay, which a few of the terminals here have access to. This is where the date issues come in, as for some reason they're all dated from the day of the last council meeting, the 12th of August, 2285. These entries, given their context, likely did occur on that date, given, most of them are just people panicking and lashing out like a bunch of shaved apes. The first one always gives me a chuckle, and it's a great example of pure misinformation. Bert being held up by a header claiming to be from the Institute has progressed into he's in league with them, and the younglings are being turned over to them. Also, they make robots that literally replace people. Why would they need their half-arsed harvest? Keep in mind, this is a really small town, and it's been like a day, so how this got warped to this degree, besides someone purposefully doing it, Perry Pete, I have no idea. The next entry is titled Sorry About Martha, and it spells out to us exactly what's happened. Martha's a tout, and went around spreading rumours, and yes, Perry the Platypus was involved as well. Presumably they're pretty scared, but know that as things stand, some people may not see it as a big deal, so they're whipping people into a frenzy ahead of time. This way, regardless of the actual truth, people's jimmies will still be rustled, and they'll act accordingly. The next entry is simply titled The Institute, and this is presumably when Martha first contacted the mayor, then started spreading lies. I mean, she seems concerned for her children, but presumably Cole is as well, and you don't see him acting the arse. Also, I would hardly call waiting a day before you call a meeting of the town as keeping information from people, especially if you're unsure if it's actually true or not. After this entry, we hear from Gerald, and he's clearly pissed the mayor blindsided him with this, and I've got to agree. We learn that Jacqueline is the one that set this relay system up for the town, so it does lend some credibility to her abilities, possibly enough that she may have actually found or figured something out. He makes the very sensible observation that this guy could have just been conning them with a traitor, as the Institute is a feared organization, and it may be enough to get them to just give them what they want. This would allow them to avoid paying Jacqueline anything. He accurately surmises that P squared is indeed riling people up and wigging out like a total fool. The last entry is from the human enigma himself. He literally wants to toss Jacqueline out of the town. Fair play to the mayor, he's been a lot more reasonable than most given he's literally lost family to the Institute, probably why he was elected. P2 is being a total creature right now. We don't know how old she is, but I'm pretty sure she isn't an adult, which makes him even more of an asshole for wanting to sentence her to death, because let's be honest, Exile's probably going to kill her, just to save himself. So overall, the situation isn't great. Obviously they weren't being conned, as, well, you know, everyone's dead, but it seems like she'd have made some effort to get the data. So now we need to enter Mass Bay University proper to get an idea of what must have went on here, both before and after the war, and to find out just what the Institute was really after. The front of this university building was set up just like another store in the town, the electrical/hardware store, and this is where Jacqueline and Gerald lived and worked. Perhaps others as well, given the size of the building, but definitely those two. There's a body to the left just as we walk in, but I can't tell how old it is. It seems unlikely they just leave all these bodies lying around, at least in the sections they're using, but there are an awful lot of them. We get told later that certain sections were closed off, and we'll see why, so I assume they only cleared out some areas, meaning a few of these bodies may be residents that either got caught in here, or fled here from the synths. The first terminal has a lot of information on the students enrolled here. A lot of entries are corrupted, mind you, but a few are still accessible. Beyond some shocking GPAs, there isn't much here. But the date of birth of certain individuals will be important later when we want to access the energy research that we learn about here. Also, Curtis Marsh is the user signed in, and it'll become clear why he was the last one signed in later on as well. The office next to this one links up with the closed off section of the building, so I'm pretty sure the body here is pre-war, and was never taken care of due to this reason. Whoever it was died in front of their terminal, and you know, tragically on a Saturday, no less. Looking at the terminal, the user logged in is Dean Alan Patterson, so we can assume the body in front of the terminal is theirs. I say assume, as it may be that any of the terminals could be used to access the mail relay, with the user account being the only thing required. The entry dates are obviously wrong, as they are dated the same as the council ones. I'm pretty sure the entries go bottom to top, and I'll give my reasoning as we go. Moreover, we get the other half of these mail conversations later on, and they do have proper dates. The first is from a Sean Campbell, and we seem to be getting one half of an argument between the two of them. Don't worry, there's another terminal with the rest of this later. He's apparently annoyed because the Dean is either demanding details about his research, or micromanaging him. Regardless, he seems to have negotiated some large grant for his department, and the Dean's not too pleased about it. He sounds pretty confident, and he seems to have waited until the Dean was on holiday to actually reply, so a bit of a cheap move. After this is a message from Teresa Robinson from Human Resources, and it's in regards to some army construction under the admin building. They claim it's all classified and they can't tell her what's going on. Moreover, Professor Campbell's lawyer apparently put something into his contract that let him approve grants like this. Well, apparently the Dean isn't great at his job, as he was told about it by the legal team and he just ignored it. Kinda makes it seem like he was hoping for Professor Campbell to get the money, like he was accused of in that email, and didn't want to know about it. The entry after this is again from Professor Campbell, and he's clearly replying to some query from the Dean. He apparently doesn't legally have to tell him where the lab is, or what his research is on, because of clearance, and he didn't legally need to tell him about the grant because the Dean allowed him to put whatever he wanted in the contract. So yeah, they're just both insufferable assholes. He finishes by telling him to take it up with a Colonel Rosemont, presumably because he has the ability to get the Dean clearance. Well, the next entry spells out exactly how that went. Spoiler, it did not go well. The military, using all of their wiles and technology, spent the better part of a few hours redirecting poor Doris here. Eventually she got them on the phone, and they just said, "You don't have clearance, bye-bye." After this, he apparently just refused to take any more calls, and if the Dean wants to deal with it, he can drive out of the base. Well, that's not suspicious or strange at all. Then again, all this is pretty weird. The last entry is from a Henry Mitchell, and apparently the Dean is having Professor Campbell monitored. Now, why they find it odd that he's going into the credit union, I'm not really sure. I mean, what? Did they think that the construction the military just started to carry out under there was just, what, unrelated to the grant? I mean, the admin building is literally right beside the credit union. Some smooth brains at work here. It finishes with something just a little bit creepy. He wants to know the birthday of one of his grad students, Leslie Matthews. Kind of getting alarm bells right there, but just keep this in mind and withhold judgment for now. At least with regards to this. For the other stuff, you know, judge away. As we begin to take a look at the flooded area just past this terminal, we begin to find a lot more bodies, and these ones are definitely pre-war. We also find that the inner part of the university, which seems to be mostly lecture halls, is completely wrecked. This did, however, lead to an excellent opportunity for a large Mirelurk population to develop here. I find it a bit unbelievable, however, the town was just okay with this. They did have security doors, true, but really, there were a lot of them in here. All it takes is a few kings, let alone a queen, to show up, and it would tear this town apart. On the lecture pews themselves, we see a sad sight. The remains of somebody can be found, but given that we will see quite soon more intact skellies, I'm not sure if this was the remains of someone the lurks got, or a skeleton that was just disturbed by their skittering. We'll head upstairs later, as there's a lot more to see down here. Through the security door next to the Dean's office, we can find a lot more of them, as opposed to the hatchlings we mercilessly slaughtered. Also in this lecture hall, we find some intact bodies. The first is someone who actually looks like they were here to learn, or to listen to a lecture. The second is a group that, given the presence of the first skeleton, is pretty confusing. It at least answers the question of what they were doing here on a Saturday, given the grip on her beer that transcended death itself this woman has. A bit of morning drinking, the perfect counter to the effects of night drinking. But unless they'd passed out here the night before, were they just drinking during a Saturday morning lecture? Or were they staff and as a result didn't care? Someone's remains we find later may answer this. Through a broken wall at the back of the lecture hall, we find someone who likely died while having their breakfast. Again, this was probably pre-war, as this was the locked region, as there's no reason a town member would have fled since with a tray of food by running into a mirelurk nest. Unless, they were just hard. The last fellow likely died against the wall, and over the years it just collapsed, sending his skeleton very close to falling into the water. Heading back to the entrance, we can take a look at the first floor now. The room to the immediate right is likely Gerald's, given the size, and apart from a dirty looking mattress, the good Ogqualtoth knows what he's been doing on it. There isn't much else here. Next to this, however, is the main hardware store, and it's here we find out more about Jacqueline and Gerald, as well as the place Gerald likely died. At the far end, we can find a body sprawled on a pile of chairs, and this had to be a customer that was here when the synths attacked, as there's no way they just leave a body here the whole time. On the counter is another body with some blood near it, and I think this is Gerald. The fact that his laser pistol is still under the counter speaks to the speed with which the synths actually struck the town. Poor bastard never had a chance. We can read his terminal to find out more of what was going on here. There are two sets of logs, the user logs and the meal relay. The user logs again read bottom to top, so someone really messed up when putting this area together. The first is titled Josephine, and it's a very old one. She's Jacqueline's mother, and presumably Gerald's wife. She died when Jacqueline was 3, meaning this entry is very old. Apparently, even at a very young age, Jacqueline had a talent for electronics and engineering, taking the whole store apart at only the age of 6. Seems like this ability just increased with age. The entry after this is titled She Actually Did It. She's the one who got the old Mia relay up and running again. Apparently Josephine had been working on it to some degree before she died as well. Also, I'm not sure how long ago it was set up, but clearly the mirelurks have been an issue for a long time, which, again, raises the question of how this was an issue that never got worse, or wasn't properly dealt with. He also raises the excellent point of why you can't just go over and talk to the person, which in a town this small is definitely more reasonable. I mean, yeah, before the war people didn't, but they'd lived like this for years, being unsociable and sending passive-aggressive emails and such, not like the people of the wasteland, who dealt with their issues with people like adults, with real aggression. Also, this was 8 years after the first entry, and that puts Jacqueline at least 14 when this went down. The last entry is titled I Don't Know What to Do, and Gerald's panicking. Of course, some asshole, and let's be honest, it was probably Perry Pete, accused her of being a synth. Now this makes no sense, given if she was, she'd just take the data she found and leave. The Institute wouldn't send another agent and threaten the town, possibly giving the town time to prepare, and maybe resulting in their synth being destroyed. But like I said, people weren't thinking, they were just acting like shaved apes. The meal relay highlights that these were the messages he received after the town meeting. The first is from the mayor, saying keep Jacqueline inside. He at least is still assuming the man could be lying, but at the least still thinks he's dangerous, and that they need to be prepared if he actually does come back. He seems to think that Jacqueline would be at risk from the people in the town. He still thinks this is all her fault, and I mean he's kind of right, but it's not like she could have foreseen this. The last line seems to indicate that he thought that if the man did come back, they'd have a chance to hand the data over, which I don't think was the case. In the next entry, titled What Has Your Daughter Done?, Martha continues to act like a Karen, also a tard. I mean pre-war gobbledygook? Woman, all the tech you have is pre-war. The terminal you've used to write this message is pre-war. I'm getting deja vu, so I'm fairly certain I said all this before. She continues to spit acid by invoking Josephine and saying that beatings are the answer. So all in all, Martha really did deserve to die, and with any luck, her kids didn't survive either, ensuring the bloodline ends with her. The final message is from Sylvia, and she tells him to run. This is probably the smartest thing anyone has said. There's a surprising amount of opportunity out there, and given their skill sets, they'd both be able to find somewhere else to set up. It's clear the Institute just intended to take the data, regardless of whether they turned anything over, so it's not like staying would have helped. And it seems like her neighbours would have just attacked her anyway. From the body here that I'm assuming was Gerald's, clearly he didn't take their advice. He probably thought better of his neighbours and assumed they wouldn't turn on them. Or he rightfully thought that, given him and his daughter were probably worth a lot more to this community than a lot of the people telling them to leave, that he didn't need to heed their threats. Across from his workshop, we can find a workstation that belonged to Jacqueline, and it seems like one she put together herself, given its appearance. On it, we find numerous entries on her activities here, and it gives us some information with respect to the data that she apparently found here. The first set of entries is titled My Journal, and unlike many of the other ones, actually seems to be properly ordered, thank God. The first entry is titled Mom's Birthday, and in it she pulls a pretty dick move on Gerald by telling him she can't remember her mother's face. I mean, fair enough, she was 3, so that makes perfect sense. But Christ the Knight spared the man his feelings. She deals with this not by talking to him, but by delving into the flooded, presumably mirelurk-filled region of the university. This is where the story of her data begins. The next entry is titled Good Find, and apparently her sneak level is 100, as the mirelurks can't seem to detect her, despite the amount of water and incredibly cramped nature of the space. She finds a hard disk in one of the lecture halls, and given there's only 2 of them here, either they never actually came back here, or they only recently started to. Now, who owned the drive? We don't know, as I don't see why this classified data would be on one of the consoles in the lecture halls in the first place. One of the terminals we encounter, sure, but not one of those. The next entry, called Score, does indeed confirm that someone left the data in the lecture hall. Now, this might have been why there were people there on a Saturday. Perhaps they were just there to discuss the data, or the findings, but this doesn't really seem to gel with what we find later, so I think it's odd. This is also when we first hear of the traitor that was likely responsible for the Institute showing up and getting all shitty. Now, to be fair, given he was looking for a buyer, it might have been an accident, but given the amount of deaths that resulted from this, I don't think that should matter as much. The second last entry is called Today is Terrible, and it's after the council meeting in which the mayor told them about the meeting, but before the one in which every single thing hit the fan, and the mob began to sharpen the pitchforks for a good old-fashioned witch hunt. It also does seem to be the case, where they're either clearing out the eggs the mirelurks lay, or the hatchlings that the parents are leaving, keeping the numbers down. Regardless, she can't find the data, and Gerald has locked up everything to stop it getting worse. This makes little sense, as finding the rest of the data is crucial if that psycho was telling the truth. I assume his reaction of telling her to stay there was because he had the revelation, accurately, that someone might be starting to spread filthy lies in regards to what was going on. Pete. The final entry is titled What Have I Done, and this is after the larger council meeting. The death threats are consistently rolling in, and Jacqueline is understandably upset and feeling guilty. Now, why he didn't tell her what was going on before this, I'm not sure, but I don't think it was the right way to handle all of this. Of course, as soon as she hears this, she decides to take responsibility and get back in there to find the data. Looking at the university meal relay, this was in direct opposition to Gerald's wishes, as he says, in plain English, no more scavenging. I don't actually think he believes it was a con man. I think he's just trying to fool himself into feeling better about a very serious situation. Also, the Institute not showing up for a really long time isn't sound reasoning. They kill people. Does it really matter if it's been a long time? From the entries we've seen around town, he seems to have been trying to put out the fires that P² has been starting, to some success. We hear from the big man himself in the final entry, where he acts like a calm and level-headed adult, and definitely doesn't call a youngling a bitch. What a total arsehole, thank God he's likely dead. This post is also just filled with some Olympic-level mental gymnastics. I mean, how could she possibly have predicted that an organization that she thought was a bedtime story up until now would decide to come and attack them? Did anyone even warn them about talking about technology to traitors or anything like that? Because if no, then she couldn't have known. The last part as well makes no sense. How does her not having the data the Institute wants mean she's on the side of the Institute? Like, surely it would make more sense to, I don't know, let their agents just keep looking for the data? What point would there be of attacking the town if they already had her installed there? I brought this point up earlier, but it's such a dumb statement, it bears mention again. The remaining meal relays are the ones that have been deleted, and apart from the mayor and Cynthia, they aren't great. Again, these were meant to be the adults of the town. Finally, we get a holotape from her that she left for Gerald.
Okay. First, I want to say I'm sorry, Dad. I knew I was onto something big, and thought I'd see what a traitor would pay if I found it. I had no idea that the Institute would be after any of this, and now the whole town is in trouble. I know you told me not to worry, but I just know that the town is going to vote to throw us out, or worse. I wasn't lying when I said I didn't have the data, despite what Mr. Owens and his cronies think. That's why I have to go back in, I know the key is in there. I just need to put the pieces together. It's something with that professor. If I can find it, maybe I can give the Institute what they want, and they'll just leave us alone.
The most important thing to take away from this holotape is that Professor was spelled incorrectly, with 2 F's. Probably the same smooth brain that ordered all the terminal entries wrong. Did I make that joke 7 years ago? Anyway, she seems to have recorded this and left it here just before she went back in for the data. Bold move. Of course, as we've seen, this didn't work. Either she couldn't find the rest of it, or the Institute just didn't care, and decided to kill them all anyway. Maybe to stop word of the research getting out, or just to maintain their Commonwealth rep. We have to go deeper into the university, through what was, up to this point, a locked security door, to find out what became of her. Through the door, we find a lot of bodies, one of which may belong to someone who was up the ladder when the bombs hit. Due to this, they likely would have died either way, so it's all fine. The rest definitely belonged to people before the war. This section was locked up, and apart from Jacqueline, I don't think it's likely anybody else was here when the synth struck. Also, one of them is literally clutching a very worn out book, so I think it's a safe bet to say these folks were pre-war. Also, you know, they had nothing else better to do on a Saturday. Heading back through the other lecture halls, or up through the collapsed floors by the Dean's office, we come to a very unimpressive library. There isn't much here except for the lovely chance to get jumped by the synths, so we'll just carry on to this really sad office to the right here. I mean, was this a librarian's? And if so, were they just despised by everyone? There are literally no windows in this office, except for the makeshift ones that are created by the holes in the walls, which is ridiculous. Their life must have been so sad they welcomed death by atomic fire or fallout. At the top of the stairs, we come to the sections of rooms that had collapsed into the lecture halls below, and at the far end, there's another skeleton. So clearly someone was still here working in these rooms when it all kicked off. There's a further smattering of bodies around here as well, but like I said, they're all likely pre-war folk. There is, however, one exception, which we can find if we go back through the security doors. This person here, in the room to the left, looks like they were in the process of begging for their life when they got taken out. They could have just been more staff just indulging in a bit of Saturday morning drinking, but I think it's far more likely this was someone who fled the synths and got caught here, as it occurs before the locked area. Perhaps they raided the liquor store on their way here to get one last drink before death caught up with them. Across from them, we can find what was likely the kitchen the two of them used, and Jacqueline's room. She can apparently repair a university computer system and machinery, but she couldn't do better than a shower curtain for a divider. Inside the room, we don't see much, apart from some clothing that does indicate it was likely her room. We don't find her here though. We need to return to the flooded area, and go into the last room beside the collapsed floors of the upper lecture halls. What we find, however, isn't pretty. Inside here, we find the terminal Professor Campbell, which we'll get to, and we find Jacqueline. From the amount of blood, she seems to have had a bad death, and if we take a look inside of her pack, we find a note. She managed to write it just after the Institute showed up and started attacking people. She thinks it's too late, and that was the case. They came in here, and they killed her. She has this mini nuke beside her, so I can't help but wonder if she intended to detonate it, and take as many of these bastards with her as she could, along with all the data. Well, she never got the chance to use it, and she seems to have died painfully. Taking a look at the Professor's terminal, we get quite a lot of data. We get the mail relay, that has many of the other halves of the conversations we've seen before. Along with this, we get his supposed research notes, and his lecture plans. Starting with the mail relay, from the bottom. The first is from Alan Patterson, with a subject I have a right to know. Thankfully, these entries are all dated, with this one occurring on the 15th of September, 2077, which means that all this occurred a little over a month before the world caught fire. The Dean is pissed that Professor Campbell went ahead and took money from the army without consulting him. The contract the Professor got seems to have guaranteed tenure, and for those of you who are not in academia, it usually means that even if the person is a total dumpster fire of a human being, provided they fulfill their work to the university, firing them is usually not straightforward. This was the email before the Professor told him to snort fiberglass and that he could approve anything he wanted to. The next entry is exactly 2 weeks later, on the 29th, and it's a spicy one. The Dean is pissed the Professor is treating him with no respect, and he doubles down about how he's the Dean. Given we already know the contract the Professor has is airtight, and he allowed it to happen, he really is a poor one. It also took the military only 2 weeks to get the construction under the admin building sorted, which is pretty impressive. It makes me wonder if the credit union was put there as a cover. Initially, it's never actually explicitly mentioned, as they keep saying the administrative building, and the credit union itself is never mentioned until later, so I wonder if it was put here as a cover. From what we read later, it at least seems to have been taken over by the military. He ends by saying he wants to know what the research is, as he clearly doesn't have a clue. After this is an entry regarding Colonel Rosemont. This entry takes place on the 8th of October, so places the entries by Doris trying to reach the colonels before here. He went down to the base, and he got the boot. At this point, he really does look like a whiny doof, and loath I am to agree with Professor Campbell. He really should have listened to the lawyers in the first place. The mention of old army buddies, as well as Professor Campbell's reference to his private sector contacts, seems to imply that he may have worked with, or even for, the military in the past. Explains how all of this got set up as quickly as it did. After this entry is a message from Curtis Marsh on the 20th of October, one of the professor's students who was working alongside of him. It seems the professor always had to be present for the research to be conducted. Now we don't know if this is because he's a control freak, or is genuinely concerned for his students. Curtis does mention there was an accident, but apparently the professor just chalked it up to a blown fuse, as opposed to ascribing blame to them. This suggests to me that maybe it was just the dean he had an issue with, and other people may have got along with him. We also learn the dean has been tailing him, and as we'll see, had other people doing so as well. I have no idea why this is being done, given the campus is very small, and I mean, obviously, they're working in the region that underwent construction by the military. He finishes by saying that the colonel wants the work completed, which is likely due to the escalating nature of the global conflict at the time, and the depleting energy reserves. More efficient reactors would have went a long way to give America an edge in the conflict. This need may be why the professor acted as they did, because they were under a hard deadline with a lot of scrutiny. Next is the entry titled Leslie Matthews, the next day on the 21st, and the dean has become a regular, Nancy Drew. He's figured out that Leslie always being on shift in the credit union, and both of them disappearing into the safe are clearly linked to the research. I mean, yeah, obviously. Granted, this all happened over a short span of weeks, so I guess, given their job, it's not so strange that they only now got around to finding out what the construction was. But clearly something was going on at the credit union, which is good for us as we got the password for it off of the council terminal. This only occurred 2 days before the bombs, so clearly the dean never got the chance to head at the police, or the press. Lastly is an entry the day before the bombs, on the 22nd. Curtis was told he had to use Leslie's birthday for something, which is again good for us, as we can get it off the same terminal he did, which is why he was logged in on the terminal downstairs. Not so great he had to look it up despite dating her. Yes, he says it's only been a few weeks, but on top of that, how long did he know her? Depending on the answer, it's not looking great for him. They were all meant to meet up on Saturday, and that leads into the goings-on under the credit union, which we'll get to after the last few entries on this terminal. The entry under research notes is just straight up the professor being a troll. He knows he's being watched and monitored, and he doesn't really care. This might have been as far as Jacqueline got with the data, given she said earlier that it had something to do with the professor, and she ended up here when she was killed. Either way, the data is elsewhere, safely, out of the hands of the dean. The last few entries in the terminal are the lecture notes, with the first batch being corrupted. The second batch that occurred the week just before the bombs is a nice snapshot into pre-war tech. As many of you know, vacuum tubes were a widely used computational component before we made the move to transistors, but in the wider world of Fallout, at least for common components, vacuum tubes were still present. Honestly, I've always thought about making a video regarding these differences and why it's really weird how they have robotics and AI that seem more sophisticated than ours, given a lot of their technology, at least at first look, isn't. The last part of it explains why the professor was looking up Leslie's birthday, and it is in fact not for reasons of creeping, but it was so he could use her birthday as a code, which is what took Curtis a hot second to riddle out. I mean, keep in mind, this lab was researching energy technology, but as someone who's been in a similar situation, I can confirm that you're still more than capable of having your brain nope out on something simple. Yeah, that's right, I'm looking at you, splitting the bill at a restaurant. Now we're on to the final location here, and the pieces of the puzzle will all fall into place. We can enter the credit union from the front or the side door in the council building, but we need the side door for the deeper sections of it. Going through the security windows, we can find a woman here who looks like she died while raiding the place. There's a synth here, and I think it was here when I arrived, but I don't think it killed her. There's no reason why someone from 2285 would be grabbing pre-war money, unless this box was just here, and they came in here to take shelter, and were chased in and subsequently killed. Now she could have been robbing the place when the bombs hit, in which case, pretty poor timing. Going down the stairs, we come to a kitchen area, and there's another unfortunate soul down here, who seems to have bit the dust in the middle of work. Not a great death, if we're being honest about it. Could be someone from the town, as we know they had access to this place, and it would kind of explain the crap we find in the vault. It's located just past here, and I assume it was being used as storage for the goods of the town. Otherwise, all the random stuff in here is pretty hard to explain. The door to the lab we are here to find is accessed via a button hidden in one of the safes. Yes, it does stretch believability a little bit on how they managed to hide this here, given it was a bank, but I think we get that question answered later on. Through the false wall, we finally get to the lab, where all this research was being hidden away. It's a well-outfitted lab, and the fruits of all this research can be found on the table here, although I picked it up many moons ago and have since forgotten what desk I put it in. The laser pistol limitless potential can be found here, and we'll soon read about its construction. More interestingly, we find 2 sleeping bags and some food that's been eaten as well. Someone else could have gotten in here, but as we know, the people of the town were ignorant of this location, so it likely wasn't them. The only other possible entrance was the collapsed tunnel at the back. So to get the goods on who was squatting here and why, we need to take a look at the last terminal here to finally get all this story. This is the terminal of Leslie Matthews, the research assistant of the professor, and contains all of the research logs in the project up to and after the bombs dropping. The good news is they're actually ordered correctly this time. The first of them is titled Containment Problems. He complains the progress has been slow, apparently because the professor is having to dodge the tails he has on him from the dean. Small area, so again, I just find it very baffling how it took them so long to find the place. This means they need to wait around a lot for the professor, and he doesn't seem to want to let them have unrestricted access. Again, we're not sure if he's actually concerned for their safety or doesn't trust them. The work doesn't seem to be going well either, with the experimental data not matching up with the theoretical calculations. The second entry shows that maybe he was telling the truth, as he's now given them full access. The credit union is either a total front or actually is one. At the very least, one of the employees is undercover army personnel. I think it being a real store that they managed to do some modifications on is more likely, as opposed to just having one pop up. If it did just pop up, then the dean is a true idiot for not figuring it out. The research has progressed somewhat as well, although at the end it seems they may have had to change the scope of the project. Reactor containment doesn't seem feasible anymore, so smaller scale devices will now be the end goal. Also, the jig is up and Curtis has been thrown under the bus for not knowing her birthday. Again, depending on whether or not she told him, this is fine. The entry after this is where it all kicks off. They managed to get here before the bombs hit, which explains how they're still alive. The sergeant was here at the time as well, so it does raise the question if one of the bodies upstairs was theirs, and if so, how they actually died. I don't think it could have been the guy in the kitchen, as that's way too close to the vault, and the bombs had already dropped. So what killed them, apart from, the fallout? It could have been some of the other explosions they've been hearing, although I'm not exactly sure what those would be, as all of the nukes should have impacted by now. They've been stuck down here for 3 days, and at this point, they're starting to panic. Honestly, fair play that they haven't already. The second last entry takes place a few weeks later, and it explains how they were covertly bringing in more equipment and supplies. They used the now collapsed entry to the parking garage next to the university. This makes sense, as it wouldn't have been possible to maintain a cover with how much stuff they would need to bring in. But it doesn't explain why this entrance further from the university wasn't used, as it seems like a more stealthy option than the credit union. Seems like it must have been people throwing explosives if it's still happening all this time later, or damaged cars finally going off. They decide to finish the research to pass the time, although they have only a few more weeks of food left. They make the decision to leave in the last entry when they finally run out of food. It's around this time that they finally finish the prototypes. The one they left here was the professor, if he ever came back. Although let's be honest, he probably died out there. Curtis finally pops the question, although they've only been dating for a few months at this point. Silly bastard probably still doesn't know her birthday. So this was the long story of University Point, both before and after the world ended. Before it did, the university hired on Professor Campbell due to their mismanagement of contract negotiations, and through a combination of tenure and authority the contract gave him, he was untouchable. He used his power and his military contracts to construct a secret underground research lab beneath the credit union. Not really so secret, as there is no way in Christ that nobody seen the tunnel being built to it or all the gear being moved in. Well, that didn't stop the dean wasting time tailing him to figure it out. This is after, of course, the professor told him to pound sand, gave him the runaround with regards to the research, and the dean got thrown out of a military base. In the end, the work was finished by his 2 students, Leslie and Curtis, after presumably all other parties in this story, up until now, had died in atomic fire. They then set out in a new world with a modified laser pistol, and we don't know what happened after that. I really do hope the 2 bodies in the credit union weren't theirs. Fast forward over 2 centuries, and a young Jacqueline Spencer is digging through data she found on some drives in the university. Here she finds mention of the reactor efficiency part of the research, and tries to find out what it'd be worth to a trader. Well, the buyer the trader found was either the Institute or the Institute caught wind of it. Regardless, they threatened the town, saying that if they didn't get the data they wanted, there would be consequences. Data that Jacqueline didn't have. Thanks to the lies and fear-mongering of Perry Pete Owens, the town was turning against her and her father Gerald. She felt compelled to get the data and make it right. Well, sadly, despite these good intentions, things didn't pan out that way. The town was destroyed, and Jacqueline was killed along with everyone else in it. All of this for 2 centuries old reactor research that didn't even pan out the way it was meant to. But as high as the degree of reflectivity that Dean Alan Patterson's brain had, he was nowhere near as bad as the fellow we'll be looking at now. If we call Principal Hudson deluded and self-righteous, and Dean Alan Patterson as just plain old incompetent, then this one is downright malicious. They exploited their students for the sake of financial gain, and in the end resorted to something even darker with regards to them. But we'll have to explore a little bit to piece this story together, here at Shaw High School. When we show up here, it's under occupation by a contingent of super mutants, and the place is littered with their characteristic gore bags. The first place to look at in this wrecked school is the office on the left, which is the secretary's office of the man we'll be learning about here. We can start by taking a look at their terminal, and we get the name of the man himself, Principal Ronald Tanner, a total oxygen thief, and a different kind of one as well. Every memo is apparently from him, but this turns out not to actually be the case. His first one is about the school's jump in standardized test scores. He's congratulating the staff here, but mostly himself, and will be receiving an award for all the hard work he didn't do. In short, he's an arrogant brat. He's also very quick to assure people that they will not be receiving any major funding increases that could lead to actual pay bumps. Heaven forbid. But fear not, for he has deigned their contributions such that they will all receive 45 minutes of nirvana in the form of a staff mixer on the weekend. How fantastic. I bet it's compulsory too. So yeah, delightful man. His next memo is in regards to the very funding increase that he tried to downplay. He pulls a Raiders of the Lost Ark and says that top men are looking into it. This definitely means no one is, and whatever happened, this buy is totally involved. He then tries to justify why it's okay even if the equipment isn't replaced. It's likely this equipment is actually faulty, as the test score increase has the square root of piss all to do with hard work or the current equipment. The second last one is read-only, and I assume this was to ensure that no one could actually change or modify it after it was sent. In it, Ronald McArrogant has awarded the school with an impromptu day off, and due to the delicate task of fixing his hairpiece, none should disturb him. I mean, straight away it's clearly not him. If that wasn't enough, whomever set this up stating that a specific class should have their grades altered should have made them realize this. Or, you know, the fact that the last page is literally signed by the student that likely did this, Rusty Burton. Yes, we'll be getting to know that name quite a bit over the course of looking at this place. Well, clearly this could be received as nothing but a prank by all, right? Wrong. The last memo is from the actual principal, and it seems that a large portion of the school was dismissed by the teachers. That's bad enough, and it likely explains why the test scores were so low, because the teachers were thickos. The fact that most of them just took a large portion of the week off cinches it for me. Like, the email was just so informal, it was obviously a ruse. I think it could also be that they don't really care, and were just looking for an excuse not to have to come into work. The last page is important. The culprit behind the previous memo is being excused from class for what we can assume is disciplinary reasons. But as we'll see, this was actually not the case. So now we need to find out what's going on with this principal and this school in regards to these miraculous test scores and what may have been done to achieve them. Spoiler, it's really not great. Heading into the cafeteria opposite that office, we can see the super mutants have dug in here very well, and there are bags upon bags of their victims hung and piled on pretty much every surface. The skeletal remains of a few of them can be found in the trays where the food was served. I say their victims, as it's a lot worse if this is how bad the school really was, but it's unlikely. Down in the basement of said cafeteria, we can find where the super mutants were stockpiling all their food. And yes, it's pretty gruesome if I'm honest. A lot of people must have gotten eaten, but what's really weird is the hatch down the back. There's this small room that just seems, I don't know, out of place. There's bodies on hooks, and there's heads and blood everywhere, but it feels like a person did this. We actually do get a radio signal telling us to come here. It's maybe the only bit of evidence, as far as I can tell, the super mutants were also benefiting from what led to the increased test scores at this school. Maybe someone set up before the super mutants were here, or someone that was sneaking past them. Perhaps they were making the person who we also heard on the broadcast do it, but it sounds like they died as well. What I really hope is this video doesn't get age restricted or demonetized because of all this gore. Heading down the hall that was straight ahead before us when we first entered, we can take a look at a few of the classrooms, many of which contain terminals, all of which have the same series of memos on them. The first classroom seems like a science lab of sorts. We're just going to ignore the fact that there was apparently a human hand being dissected here. Really hope that was post-war, not pre. There's also a Tesla trap here, but unless the teachers were in the habit of hunting the students for sport, which could be the case given what we learn here, this is also likely post-war. Next to this room, we see that another room above has collapsed down into this one, totally wrecking it. There's a kitchen attached to it, but I think this is part of the classroom, meaning this may have been a home ec room of sorts or something similar. Given what we see later, it seems like there'll be only one kind of cooking going on here. Now as we head up the stairs, we can find the first of the many strange sights here. Mentats. Boxes full of mentats. And it won't be the last time. Some of you may be thinking back to the subject of the recent memos, and putting two and two together. For now, just keep them in mind. In fact, on the next level, as we pass the lockers, we start to notice a few strange things. Yes, one of them has some mentats in them. But a little further on, we find, well, a much worse locker. A lot of jet, to be precise. Now, to be fair, we don't know how often this place has been raided, but I will point out that mentats are a valuable item in the wastes, and yet this school is still full of them, just lying around in boxes. This would suggest to me the place hasn't been raided, which means these could be pre-war. Possibly one group of students we'll hear about later on. Now we can take a look at the classroom to the left here. Specifically, we're interested in a terminal found at the back of the classrooms. We can see this was the terminal of Rusty Burton, the one who sent out the fake memo by gaining access to the principal's computer. Now this PC, like many of the ones we had access to when we were younger, has a lot of additional software to stop anything that could possibly be construed as fun. In the world of Fallout, like in our own, people will always circumvent them, and that hasn't changed here. This terminal has had pretty much everything disabled on it, and we'll have to read to find out how. When we take a look, it has a cringy warning you'd expect someone to put in their diary, and given the initial intelligence of this kid, it's not surprising if I'm being honest. The first entry makes it sound like he's breached the mainframe in a crap hacker movie. The entry itself is just a smorgasbord of red flags. First off, he wasn't smart enough to do this, another student did. Second, he either eats way too much or isn't actually being fed at home, which is confusing as then he says he sees a therapist. That's not usually cheap, as it doesn't sound like it's through the school. So why does he need someone else's money for food? It could just be he's a wee arsehole. And honestly, as this story unravels, that is my professional assessment. The next one says Tanner sucks, and yes, he does. But he talks about being pulled out of class and instructed to sell mentats to the other students. In exchange, he gets better lunchtimes and his permanent record gets altered. He apparently already does sell stuff, so perhaps the jet and psycho in that locker were his, though then we do get into the problem of retcons. This presumably occurred after the alteration of the memo, as it would be very strange for him to risk a deal like this by pissing off the principal, also given his, as we'll see, increased intelligence. This would imply, however, that the memos weren't in the right order, as the ones stating that the test scores had increased occurred before the forged memo. Also, he started to take the mentats. From here on out, it's like 2001 Space Odyssey with the apes. It's like we get to watch him learn how to think. Entry 3 is simply titled Updates, and there is a significant shift with both the quality of spelling and the vocabulary used in the entry. The mentats are clearly doing their job, and his school scores are improving. Likely the other students began to improve around this time as well, given Tanner is pleased. Other students also seem to have been recruited into this, so it wasn't just an isolated case with Rusty. At this point, either Rusty hadn't realised the test scores were improving overall, or he just hadn't figured out why this was a good thing for Tanner. The second last entry is titled An Intriguing Development. He has now realised the impact the improved test scores would have on the school, and how it would benefit the principal. Of course, even if he's smarter, he's still a garbage human, so he decided to figure out a way to turn this to his advantage. He lays it all out in his final entry, titled My Master Plan, and it really does read like an entry on I Am Very Smart on Reddit. He takes a clay moulding of Tanner's key, and has managed to get access to his office. Here, he now has the lion's share of the mentats. We also get the information that Tanner is indeed pocketing most of the fund increases, though we'll learn more from his terminal later on. Whether or not he took all the mentats, we don't know, as many are still strewn about the school, and some can still be found in the principal's office, though given what happens later, well, the principal may have gotten them back. He's decided to blackmail the principal with a meeting in the library in order to get access to some of the cash the principal's been pocketing. And this will definitely end well. So the principal was using the students to spread mentats, bolster the standardized test scores, and then pocket some or the majority of the funds they get due to the rise. We can find the key Rusty has made in his desk with his terminal, and from there, we can get into their office. We head to the library last as we get the key to it from the principal's office. First, however, we'll take a quick look around the rest of the school, taking a left when we reach this floor instead of going straight ahead. We come to an area with a library on our right. It's interesting as here, in plain view, we can find more boxes of mentats. Keep in mind that the place was being occupied by a sizable force of super mutants at the time, so if they were the ones pulling the mentats out of wherever they were being kept, it raises the question if they were taking them. We don't actually really find any evidence of this here, so we can't really answer the question. The only thing would be, as I mentioned before, that radio broadcast. The last thing of interest on this floor is a bottle of whiskey we can find underneath one of the teacher's desks. Yet more evidence of contributing factors to why the scores were so low. Now, for the principal's office. Heading into the storage cupboard at the back, we find two things. The first is a load of drink, and it's a question of whether or not it's his, or belonged to the teacher who we found drink under the desk of. Or it was Ronald's and he was just an alcoholic. Now there's still a lot of mentats here, which stands to reason, as the door to the office was still locked. But it does raise the question of how much he gave to the other students if, after 2 centuries, this place still had such a high quantity. Taking a look at his terminal, we can see his whole master plan, if you could even call it that. Apart from students being prohibited, which means it's fine for us because we're an adult, we can find a lot of entries. The important ones are in the personal folder. The first is from August 2076, and we can see just how much of a loser he is. Not only is he a worthless principal, he was so incompetent, even Voltec didn't want him. That's a new type of tard, right there. His dilemma is the students, not him, need to do better. So he begins pondering how to do this. His next entry is the names of the students he got to sell the mentats. Also, Paul Picard. Come on now, Bethesda. Behave yourselves. The group is small, but then again so is the school. The entry after this in October of the same year is apparently a private one, but I mean, shouldn't they all be, especially given the content of the first one? He's got this small group of students to sell the mentats he supplied them with. Now, he never states where he got them from in such vast quantities, and honestly, I'm not sure either. They weren't particularly cheap pre-war, so it has to be asked if the money he would embezzle would offset the cost of the mentats. I mean, this went on for months, as we'll see, so he had to have gotten a lot of them, and paid out of pocket to avoid a trail, perhaps from one of the nearby hospitals. The last entry is a personal one in May 2077. He's apparently bought a new beach house, and it must be with the money he embezzled. At the same time, he may be having an affair. I mean, I could just be presuming here, as all I have to go off is he's an arsehole, but I think he is. The important part is the end of it. A meeting with Rusty, the one that he arranged in the library, wherein he intends to blackmail the principal. Now let's be honest here. Rusty's not smart. He's artificially boosted his cognitive ability, temporarily, using mentats, and he must be taking a lot of them for the effect to be this pronounced. So he definitely didn't think this all the way through. We'll get the results of that meeting soon. Outside of the personal folder, we get an email he received from the Superintendent Marcello. It's a confirmation the plan really was working. It also shows he's a liar, as the budget increase was apparently substantial, and was meant to go to wage increases, not a 45-minute party. He also got a raise as well, so he's been stealing money, while also illegally getting more money as well, the sly dog. The memos are just the same ones we saw before, so now it's time to head into the library, and see how all this came to head. It's locked with a key we get from Tanner's office, and it's here we confront the last of the super mutants, possibly the ones that arranged the broadcast here. There isn't a lot else here apart from them and the usual bags of meat, but we came here for a conclusion. The result of Ronald and Rusty's meeting. Well, we find it in the room next to the book return machine. Here, we get a holotape titled Property of Rusty Burton.
All right, Burton. I'm here. Hurry up. Out with it. I have a lot of plans for this summer, and none of them involve chatting with you.
Why, Ronald, I'm hurt. Skipping the pleasantries and getting right down to business. And after all we've accomplished together this semester.
For the last time, you little snot, it's Principal Tanner.
Fine, Principal Tanner. I'll make this quick. You've been giving me mentats to distribute to the students quietly and under the nose of the faculty. I have. Because of this, test scores have skyrocketed. The school board has noticed. You received quite an increase in funding, but the faculty doesn't know. No one here knows except you. And now, me. You've been skimming off the top and pocketing most of the funds. I want 50% of what you're embezzling. We'll go to Superintendent Marcello with this.
What? How did you... When did you get so smart?
You've been giving me brain pills every week. What did you expect, you pathetic little man?
Well, so what if it's all true? No one's going to believe you. You're just a kid, and I'm the principal, and more importantly, an adult.
Oh, I think they'll believe me, Ronald. Especially after they hear you admit everything in your own words.
What are you talking about? Wait, is that a holotape? You son of a...
Well, there it is. The culmination of all of this. What happened? Well, given the entries are all months before the bombs fell, and we get no other information about this, and that Tanner's office is still intact, here's my take. He killed Rusty. We never get confirmation of this, but I can't really see this working out any other way. Now, the holotape is just sitting here, so it was never taken to the superintendent. However, it does raise the question of why no one else found it, or who was unpacking all the mentats around the school that we find, and what happened to them after this. All this happened just before the summer, so either they made a deal and he gave him 50% and just left the holotape there for some reason, or he killed him. Now, granted, the door is locked when we arrive, so that could explain why no one found it, but that left 4 months, give or take. He would have taken some action to get rid of it. Likely, we'll never know what ultimately happened. His plan to distribute the mentats and boost test scores completely worked. He was able to fool the staff as well with regards to the funding increases. They didn't have a clue, which pretty much means that, even if he did give in to the blackmail, he still got away with it. If he did kill Rusty, he still got away with it. Unfortunately, I don't think Ronald McDonald here ever got caught. But I think we've heard just about enough about the monstrous nature of humans before the fallout. Let's get back to the monstrous nature of humans after it, where we can fool ourselves into thinking the end of the world was the cause. We can find it all here, at DB Technical High School, don't you worry. Straight inside, we can see the building is bollocksed. The majority of the floors on the first floor have collapsed into the ground floor, and we'll see the effect that had on people who may have been here as we go through. We also find a lot of bodies. I mean a lot of bodies. Some are explained to us by what happened here, but some are just a load of skeletons everywhere, and we'll talk about that, such as this foot, possibly harvested by Jangles the Moon Monkey. Straight away, to the left, we find our first proper death. They seem to have went out at their desk, so likely here on the Saturday, the bombs fell. However, all the other bodies we see here are of interest, as they're mangled and shredded. I won't point them all out, given the massive quantity, but it isn't just regular raider shenanigans, I promise. Through a very boring storage closet, we come to a lovely library. It's got heads, meds, bears, and the odd mini nuke stacked in a body, as well as some heads on poles. So all in all, an excellent environment to take in some first-rate literature. I kid, of course. The bears are a bit much. The strange thing about this is the heads are a warning, right? But we usually see that outside the raider camp, not inside it. It's just not sanitary. It also looks like someone was setting up a camp in here or trying to secure the room. There is a sleeping bag here, so it wasn't used at some point. So maybe there was something they felt was a danger to them, and they were trying to scare it off. Maybe whatever was killing people and cramming their bodies into bookshelves. Out in the corridor, somehow it gets worse. More heads on poles, and now there's bodies hanging from hooks. Just another reminder again to please give this video all the support you can before it gets demonetized and age restricted. The heads could have been warnings, but the bodies just look like even more victims, if I'm honest. It just doesn't really make a lot of sense to put this many up in here. Past a few more of them, we come to a collapsed wall, and we can see some more pre-war skeletons. Or at least the one that sprawled over the trolley looks pre-war. Seems being this deep inside the school did nothing to prevent them from being taken out by the initial blast, as it would be strange if they came back in here after the fallouts. Unless, like the strapped chap in Suffolk County Charter, they were looters. The skeleton on the bottom shelf just looks like someone crammed it in here. Just outside that room, we do find a large amount of rubble, and underneath it, we can see more bones. So these could be the remains of some of the other people that were here on a Saturday when it all kicked off, or the remains of some more victims. But it's odd they'd be this far along in their decomposition, especially when we get somewhat of a timeline of events later. Down the hall past this, we come to a few things of note. The first is some buff out in a locker with a baseball glove. I'm just going to say it, I think the baseball team was juicing, possibly in response to their abysmal performance of late, as we'll see in a minute. Opposite that locker is what looks like the nurse's office, that was barred from the opposite side, oddly enough. It could have been the raiders, but I think it's more likely they were just too lazy to unbar it. Inside, we can find some poor soul that the nurse's office couldn't save. Looks like they've also been dead a very long time, so someone that was here on a Saturday for some reason. Though why the nurse would be here on a Saturday so the office was even operating, I'm not sure. Perhaps a member of the baseball team. There isn't really much to see in the office after that. So back across the hallway, we go to the toilets, that wonderful source of all things strange in Fallout. We can find a hand in a waste bin, but we can do better. Looking in the first cubicle, we can find that someone was smoking. Now since they hid, I assume it was a student. Again, raises the question why they were here. Perhaps they were doing some Vault-Tec entrance exam prep. What is that, you ask? No idea, but it's brought up on the PA system and seemed to be beginning on a Saturday. Presumably, that was the Saturday the bombs fell, as the announcement would be for that week. This could also explain why there are as many bodies here as there are, other people here to do prep that got killed. Outside these toilets, we see my reasoning for why this team was juicing. They don't seem to have won a championship in about 91 years. I kid, of course. I think. I mean, if they had more recent wins, they displayed them, right? So unless I've missed those, they don't seem to be a very good team anymore. Heading back into the hall with all the heads, we can go right into the kitchen. Here, we find what looks like another really old body, but that seems to have been just left undisturbed in a region with a large amount of foot traffic. I mean, this is where they were making food, or at least adjacent to it. We can find the actual place they cook food in what looks like the old walk-in storage for the kitchen. At least here, hygiene has won out, and there's no people dangling from poles. Just food, and that's fine. I mean, it doesn't look human, so fingers crossed it's not. The larger collapsed region is just outside the kitchen, in the old cafeteria. Apart from the regions of the floor closest to the walls, everything else has pretty much collapsed into here, leaving a wide open space that the raiders are kind enough to run into repeatedly to allow you to take potshots at them. The wee dears. There's a lonely looking microphone at the far end, and I think this is where the announcements were probably recorded. Heading upstairs before the basement, we can check out the rest of this place. Through a hole in the wall, as soon as we climb a dodgy ramp made of tables, vents, and held together with the power of prayer, we come to the, I guess, games room? Or at the least, in between all the death, someone had a game of bowling going. Perhaps there was even a league. And yes, I saw the leg in the table, so maybe somebody was actually eating other people. In the next room, pretty much one floor up from the other one, we see another sort of makeshift barricade. Or at least it was set up so that people could quickly make use of the cover if they needed to. The next few regions are a little sparse, if I'm honest. The area above the cafeteria is, as we discussed, pretty much just open air due to the, collapsed floor. The next thing we want to take a look at is what remains of what I think was the computer lab. I say this because somebody was very threatened by all that technology and decided to burn a shed load of computers. How long the fire's been going, or will continue to go for, we don't know. What's pretty funny is only one terminal was left unburned, and it's actually in use by the raiders here. It's where we start to get some of the information that we need to piece together what went on here. But before that, we can continue through the room and out into the hallway, into the room opposite. It's here that we find more evidence that these raiders were total headers. Someone tried to cook jet. I mean, literally cook it. They tried to set it on fire in the remains of the chemistry lab. Now, I'm not a fictional chemist, but this doesn't seem like how one would go about preparing jet. I'm just saying. Now, back into the room with a bonfire to take a look at that terminal. The first entry is called Book Report Writer, and while it was corrupted, I wonder if somebody was using this to cheat their schoolwork. The entry after this is called Boss Acting Strange. It seems this raider group attacked and took over Backstreet Apparel, an area near to here, but since then, the leader, who we later come to know as Bosco, has been acting odd, and for some reason has moved into the basement and is drinking the pool water. Yeah. I'm sure all of that stagnant and possibly radioactive water will not have an adverse effect on him. The next entry is titled Something in the Basement, and apparently their boss, now in the basement and drinking the pool water, thinks there's a monster down there. Shockingly, no one seems to have put two and two together that these events could be related. Bodies start to pile up, and they aren't in a good way when they do. We'll discuss whether this is the bodies we find later. The final entry is just called More Bodies. 8 have been found now, and there could be more. People are refusing to go down into the tunnels, which raises the question of why no one thought to think why their boss was just unaffected by this beast. Morons. It also implies that more people have died if people are going after this beast and are never seen again. Whomever this was had enough and is leaving, attempting to get out through the tunnels. Now the tunnels in question are a large area that links up with this one, but for the purposes of this video, we'll be ignoring it for now. And yes, I'm pretty sure I said that the last time too. Well, if nothing else, I'm consistent. Heading past the room where they literally tried to cook jet, we find the weirdest skeleton here. Now, unless this was posed, this person died on this ladder, likely in the initial blast, and just stayed here for 2 whole centuries. I mean, this is a very precarious looking body, yet somehow the balance hasn't been broken. Worse yet, that means they were here on a Saturday doing maintenance. What an awful way to go. But I appreciate their skeletal remains' perseverance to stay on the job, an attitude that the pile of bottles in the next room also shares. A very delicate balance also, and us blowing through here and slaughtering everyone somehow didn't break it. Also, given the number of bodies dropping, these raiders had way too much time on their hands. There's a very suspicious looking plunger in the toilets to the right, because as we know, a plunger that looks like it's doing what it was created for is surely up to some nefarious purpose. Now to take a look at the basement in the main dining hall. Immediately, we find a skeleton in a shopping cart. Seems they died while eating some crisps and drinking. Now, unless this school was very bad, I'm going to assume this was a very old post-war death. Maybe somebody who got in after the subway caved in and it connected this part of the school with it, or they were here from before the raiders showed up. In the other room is someone whose last act seems to have been to hoard some buff out. It could be they got it from the locker room behind them. As we have discussed, the team may have been using them, or they came down here to take some and got taken out in the initial blast. I think the locker room behind them is the same one that the announcement says keeps getting water on the floor as well. There's also some psycho in the locker room, but given the proximity to Bosco, it seems more likely one of the raiders owns it. Now we can head to the swimming pool and see what the beast really was. The scene is just as gruesome down here, with bodies and heads mounted everywhere, all leading to a throne of sorts at the end of the room. Now here we do find some skeletons, but it's hard to say if these were collected and placed here, or are the remains of meals. We do find the man himself here, and he is as mad as a bag of spiders. After we kill him, we can take a look at the terminal beside his little throne to see what was really going on. It's a series of entries from Bosco on the gang's activities, starting with the Shamrock Tap House. They apparently locked in whomever was there, then let their dogs loose to maul them before accepting their surrender. Torque seems to be the handler of the dogs. After this, all they needed to do was hit Backstreet Apparel, which is where it all went wrong. The entry is titled Damn Mutts, and apparently one of Torque's dogs attacked Bosco. It was bad enough he had to kill it to get it off of him. We can take a guess, given what happens to him, as to why the dog actually did this. However, he seems to intend to make an example out of Torque, as it affects his standing with the gang. The entry after this one is Something is Wrong, and Bosco is apparently suffering from blackouts and mood swings after the dog bite. He thinks the dog was sick, which it likely was. Now he admits he can't control his temper, and decides the correct way to ensure this is dealt with is by making an example of someone, which is definitely because he can't control his temper. After this is poison, and yeah, the lad is way off the deep end. He's apparently killed 3 assassins, which you just know from the message were increasingly concerned fellow gang members. I mean, he is losing it, and he knows something's wrong, so the paranoia is growing, and he comments about his skin crawling as well, which is quite odd. Some of you have likely already figured out what is happening to him. The next page, talking about his thirst, is the reason he decided to go down to the basement, as it had a lot of water. Likely this means that he was definitely drinking the water here. He feels safe down here, but still talks about making people understand he's in control, which leads to the next entry, on the beast. He describes the beast as something that lies waiting in the dark, watching him with glinting eyes. Just remember that part. It's also started to kill his men and leave trophies, which are bodies in various states of being skewered around the place. He also wakes up covered in their blood. Now why nobody suspected him at this point, I don't know, but yeah, it's definitely him. He states that nobody else can find it, and then says they still say this, even when they're hung from chains. Now I'm not sure if this is him saying that he's talking to their dead bodies, after either he's done with them, or this supposed beast is, or he's hanging them from chains because they aren't getting the job done. The last line where he says he'll just keep killing until they find it suggests the latter, not the former, which also explains why some bodies were hanging from chains. The entry after this claims they caught the beast, and we'll get to what that was quite soon. This must have been after one of the men tried to make it to the tunnels, as mentioned in that terminal entry. He decides to show the other gangs that they're the real monsters, and after this, we get a series of entries detailing what happened. The sunk entry states they couldn't touch Libertalia due to there being too much water, and apparently, this isn't a problem anymore. This implies that they managed to take the place this time, as he's a huge fan of water now, given his condition. Next is Last Call, and it's about Tar Tom, another raider gang leader. He's dead, and I'll be honest, I can't remember if this was something we were meant to have done, or something that happened as a result of Bosco, and I think this confused me the last time, so if anybody knows, please tell me. The last entry is about Hyde Park, and apparently, the last raider gang leader is now dead, someone by the name of Scudder. So we've got all the information up until now. So what happened here? What was this beast? Well, as I'm sure you've all figured out, the beast was Bosco. He was bitten by a dog that sounds like it was afflicted with rabies. Due to this, he suffered some pretty severe psychological effects. Pretty much what happens to you if you get bitten by an animal with rabies. Before you know, kills you. He displayed the usual symptoms of increased aggression, severe paranoia, thirst in this case, and issues with his muscles. Eventually, he started to black out and kill his gang members. Now, he talked about the glinting eyes, and he first encountered it down in the basement with the locker rooms. We also find him with a mascot head on. The mascot of the school, which was a bear. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they brought him with the mascot head, which means the beast he was seeing was literally just the head down in the basement. This should mean the other raiders had figured it out by that point, which then raises the question why they didn't kill him. I suppose the body count that he had racked up to this point was enough of a deterrent to stop them from even trying. Then he decides to attack and subjugate the other gangs in the region, listing a few of the places that we can explore. This seems to have been going pretty well for them, you know, apart from the huge amount of bodies strung up around the place. Yeah. Of course, then a real beast shows up, and they find out how it is to deal with a proper monster. But come on now, I mean some lad off his case because of an illness slowly killing him. My children, we can do better. So let's take a look at a cult. Specifically, the lovely chaps and chapettes in East Boston Preparatory School. I mean look, they've got a sign that says purified water. It looks like it was made to trick the roadrunner. Traders are welcome here. Surely this time, things are bound to go okay, right? Of course not, you fools. But it'll still be entertaining to explore the place. When we head in, we see this school is also getting into the spirit of Halloween. Also, this school is banjaxed. Heading straight, we can take a look in this auditorium/stage, where a target range has been constructed. Now, I don't know where they got all the dirt for these mounds they put the sandbags on. Seems like a lot of work when they could have just put the tables on the floor. To the right, we can see some skeletons in wheelchairs, and straight ahead, another one previously on a chair, likely before the target practice started. They all look quite old, so I'm guessing just some of the people who were caught here on the Saturday it all kicked off and didn't quite make it. Why there were this many people in wheelchairs, I don't know. Maybe a sort of outreach program for the elderly from the school, or a play of sorts that was rehearsing. They also could have been some unfortunate students caught here on a Saturday. Back out in the hall, we can head left from the entrance and start to look in some of the classrooms here. The first has a collapsed wall that leads into the other room. However, to the left, we get to a small room, and it just seems a little off. There's a kettle set up here and some clothing that looks like it was set out to be ironed or pressed. It just seems a little off. Going through the collapsed wall, we can find a skeleton draped over a table covered in cola that I assume was taken from the now dismantled machine on the right. Not sure if this was their doing and nobody moved it or what. Either way, they've had a rough time of it. But it's okay. They're fine apparently, according to the prophetic blocks. Heading out into the hall, we need to head through the door straight ahead as everything else is blocked. Here we can find someone's ribcage along with a blood-splattered box. However, it's the hole in the wall ahead of it that's of interest. Someone was either going through here when the bombs hit and the ceiling took them out, or they tried to take shelter here and, well, the ceiling took them out. There's another set of doors behind these bookcases, but unless they were blocked pre-fallout, then they must have fallen through when the floor did. Apart from some board games and duffel bags, there isn't much else in the room behind this body. After this, we can either head back through the door, or given we have no corporeal form, through these pipes and up the stairs. Here we find what looks like the skeleton of a teacher, someone who looks to have been out for their mid-morning coffee break. Though, again, this was the weekend, so they likely really needed that coffee. Not sure what's the deal with the knife beside them. It's a bit odd, but hey, the students could have been mental. Heading back to the entrance, we take the stairs up, as there's no other way given everything else is collapsed. The first floor is in a lot worse shape than the ground, but given that it's mostly collapsed into it, this is to be expected. Going to the left, towards the lockers, we can find someone's attempt at being cute, and showing what happens if you try and shove a skeleton into a locker. Going through the bathroom, we can find, this time in the upper walkway of the stage area, a similar experiment with a bin. Either that, or whomever this was really wanted that can, and was just caught by the blast wave in this compromising position. Heading into another classroom, opposite the toilets, we don't find much, except for two things. First of all is the skeleton behind the door in this room. Now it's clearly meant to just be a science teacher, going off of the jacket. But if my memory serves, it has a Voltec logo on it. Now I assume this is just a mistake because of the assets, but still, interesting. The other thing is someone trying to one-up whomever tried to literally cook Jet in the last area. They try the same thing with a mini nuke, a real hold my beer moment. I'm not sure what the skull was for, but when we learn what these raiders were doing, you can take a guess. Also Professor is written on the board and crossed out for some reason. Next to the classroom, we can find two teddy bears in a compromising position. Someone here likely just had a dirty mind, which is to be expected given what this group was up to. Also behind this, but not shown, is a Behedron skull. What's that, you ask? Well, it's a Brahmin. I say Behedron as that is the name of the fictional bovine creature in the Mouths and Books of the Fallen series. I made the mistake of saying that in my Bloodworms video, and had to put up with loads of comments of people correcting me, as if somehow, after doing lore all of these years, I didn't know what a Brahmin was. Like, really, go take a look at that comment section. It's ridiculous. Sorry about that tangent, that's just something I've wanted to vent about for a while. I make mistakes. I am a fallible human being. Anywho, that rant has taken us to the music room, or at least I think it is given the setup of the chairs. Also the noise dampening foam on the walls. I can't recall if I've actually seen that anywhere else. In the closet here is the remains of another skeleton, possibly someone locked in here for a poor performance. In the room after this one, some other poor bastard remains can be found, and again, it's likely someone who got caught here on a Saturday. though it does drive home how much these raiders really needed to clean up around the place. Now we head to the top floor to finally figure out what was up with the raiders here, as it's pretty mental. On the right, as soon as we go up the stairs, we can find the 2 rooms that made this place all worth it. Inside them are cages, corners of the room that, using whatever was lying around, were turned into prison cells of sorts for the inhabitants. They at least seem to have gotten a bucket to relieve themselves in, but apart from that, there isn't much here to suggest that they had much in the way of comfort. Some of them do seem to have been fed, but we'll see this wasn't a kindness extended to all. We can also see pools of blood dotted around the place, and together with the cages, it pretty much confirms these prisoners were being mistreated. This spatula and large pool of blood around the chair suggests a very creative form of torture. The good old Qualtoth knows what. But we'll need to take a closer look at the terminals here to see what was going on. The one in the first room has the records of initiations of 3 recruits, though that's a generous use of term. The first is Stinky, who I assume was so named because his feet smell. You know, because they seared the flesh from them. This happened after isolation didn't affect him. Now of course that means the next logical action is fire. He signed something called the blood contract, and don't worry, we'll get to that. After this is Red Finger, likely for his now mangled hands and blood from having his teeth pulled. Also they say he wasn't able to stand it, but I mean, he lasted 3 teeth. What a trooper. So we see a trend emerging of pain being used to coerce signatures on this blood contract. The last entry in this terminal is Killer, and it's what happened when the term monster is relative, and they meet one, by their standards. Didn't seem to care what they did to him, he just smiled and spat. Good on the lad. In all the entries we see here, this is the only report of a failed initiation. Heading over to the next terminal, we get another 3 entries. The first is Fishface, named so due to the battering they gave him, which presumably damaged his face in some permanent manner. They apparently did this until he couldn't eat, let him heal, then did it again. So proper torture, just like the others. They then put him on the same crew that inflicted this damage to him, likely as he would now be more receptive to hurting others. Next is Rock Teeth, and I assume he's so named as he doesn't have any teeth left. Apparently he still wanted his eyes and hands, so he caved in the end. The coward. It gives us a good escalation scale though. Isolation, fire and beatings, fingers and teeth pulling, then taking limbs and organs. Finally there's Beggar, and his entry just paints him as terribly confused, like he wandered in here for one thing and got another. Perhaps he was looking for death. Well, this is one of the weirder ones, as it says death by rats. Now I assume this is probably the old heat up a bucket with a rat in it on their stomach job, or shoving them down their throat. But it's weird they just went straight from beatings to that, as opposed to all the other means that they've used to break people. So overall, they're capturing people, and then subjecting them to pain and torture, all to make them sign something called the blood contract. What's that? Well, don't worry, everybody in here has one. Taking a look, they apparently write it in their own blood, swearing to the judge and jury their life upon pain of torture or death. Now this seems a bit redundant to me, as you've kind of just annealed them to all that on the way in. Might be they're pretty nonplussed about it by the time they want to leave. I assume the jury is either a subset of the raiders here, or all the initiates of the gang. We'll see the judge real soon. Outside of those rooms with the cages, we find another likely pre-Fallout death. A woman with either a paddle to discipline some poor bastard, or a breadboard of some sort. Hopefully the latter, and not the former, unless, you know, you're into that kind of thing. Past a flaming trash can that looks like it's signaling someone, we come to the luxurious accommodation one got if you join the jury, a hostel-style pile of dirty mattresses. Delightful. But wait, there's more. There's also a meager amount of drink, smoke, some board games, and a communal feces bucket that we also used to store the drink in. Yes, after torture, it really was the life of luxury. Though I guess it's relative, so in a way to them, it was. Now to take a look at the judge in the next room. As you can see from the mannequins, he's a man of refined taste. He also had a good death, and certainly did not die in a fashion that would disgrace him. Now, the raiders respawned when I came back here, he didn't. That's from the first time I killed him years ago, and for the life of me I can't remember why I stole his clothes. I haven't got them, as far as I know, so this one's a bit of a mystery. But Jesus, look at that lad. He's a thick one, isn't he? I don't know why I find this so funny. Something about his character model just looks off. You know, besides the fact that his arm seems to have melded with his body. But maybe it's because I, like yourself watching this, really wasn't expecting this sight to greet me when I walked in here. He's the judge, but we don't really get any other information regarding why he did this. Perhaps he truly is a wizard, and the blood contract is actually binding. More likely, like in Bosco's case, an old injury greatly impaired his ability to reason and think, and he just came up with this one day. Now for the last 3 skeletons here. The first, and in my opinion most impressive, is found in the toilets here. They, like many others in this video, have held a death-like grip on a bottle of whiskey for over 2 centuries. I say 2 centuries as from the brush and hat they worked here. It's very unlikely someone showed up here after the world ended and decided to clean, let's be honest. A decent attempt was also made to spook people with some mannequins in the stall next to this. Back out in the collapsed hallway, we can find the remains of somebody jammed into another collapsed ceiling. Now, given they seem to have came down from above, this school must have had another floor. Part of a plane has leveled the place outside, so it's not that surprising that we can't access it. The last room opposite that skeleton is trapped, presumably due to the safe in the corner, and has one last skeleton in it. This one seems to have perished while doing something on the computer. Could have been work, but this was a Saturday, so I'm just going to assume that it was something dodgy, because why not? But that's the end of the story of the judge and the jury. They took over this school and they used it as a base of operations to take people captive and break them, to subject them to various types of torture, all in an effort to get them to sign the blood contract, swearing their fealty to the group. Presumably, Judge Zeller started this group, although he could have taken it over from someone else. But what is for sure is that they turned this place into a den of brainwashing and suffering. So there we go, folks. 5 schools, 3 principals or deans, 2 reader groups, and it's all bad. In my opinion, Tanner's the worst. He exploited the students of his school in a pretty cruel way, and then, as far as I can tell, offed one of the people he got to carry out a lot of his work, Rusty Burton. The runner-up is obviously Principal Hudson. She was also exploiting them, but that may have been born out of a more immediate desperation for funding, as opposed to personal gain. Moreover, it only occurred over 5 weeks, and it isn't like she made the paste, so the overall damage was low. Professor Campbell was an arse, and Dean Alan Patterson was an idiot, but I wouldn't say either of them really harmed anybody. They just annoyed a lot of people. Obviously, in terms of deaths, the readers are worse, but they have the excuse of it being post-Fallout, and we expect it from them. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed this compilation. If you did, likes and comments really help the video, and subscribe if you want more content like this. If there's anything in particular you would like to see, please leave a suggestion in the comments, on my pinned comment, or better yet, on the community post for this video. Thank you all again, and I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.